Hello. This is the first time I've done this one for our class, so I won't make it too long, but I think it's an important one to sort of review some of the things that you should have learned in COM 1110, may not have or might have forgotten them. They're kind of basic, but there's some things that you might want to look at. As I have said before, the COM 1110 textbook that we produced in-house is a really, really good resource for all things public speaking, and it's really more advanced than most freshman speech textbooks. So, if you can get a copy of it and it's free and just use it, I think you'll enjoy it. So, this particular PowerPoint is about presentation structure, and I'm going to diverge a little bit, which is kind of funny because it's about structure, and structure is all about staying on point, but I'm going to take a little bit of a detour to come back at one point. So we're going to have some opening thoughts, which is really sort of my detour, then why structure is important, and then how to do the structure in a speech or a presentation. The first thing I want to talk about is the power of reciprocity, and this is an important communication and psychological tool. It can be manipulated, but it's important, and it really applies to public speaking in a number of ways. We've all heard the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That usually is associated with Jesus in the Gospels. There are versions of it from other cultures that are more in the negative, that say, don't do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. But Jesus took a positive turn with it. And of course, some people today are saying, don't do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but do unto others as they would have you do. And that's a good point. That takes empathy, that takes listening, that takes being willing to not do just what you think of is good for you, but what might be good for the other person. But you have to know the other person and know what is their love language, or whatever you want to call it in that case. If you're not familiar with the love languages, you can Google it, and it's an interesting theory. There's some research to back it up, but it has to do with how people respond to different types of communication and actions in their relationships. So the power of reciprocity is very much about the golden rule, and it's the idea that that's really hardwired into us, whether it's culturally or biologically. I'm not sure which, and that's not my area really, but it's the idea that if you do something for me, I feel obligated to do something in return of equal value, or sometimes greater value. And there's so much research about this. Some of it's really kind of funny. My favorite example is that I get a lot of solicitations, email from regular mail and email from organizations wanting me to give them money, and I get these piles of them, and I just throw them in the garbage, and I say, everybody wants my money, and roll my eyes and go on. And you probably have the same problem. And some of them are legit, and I do give to them, like Habitat for Humanity or Compassion International or Doctors Without Borders. Those are organizations I support. And some of them are just shams and scams. They'll put the word something cancer, or something women's cancer, and you're supposed to be all, oh, I'll give to that. And it's not really a decent charity, if it's a charity at all. So, but a lot of times they will send you something. They will send you address labels or little tablets or little trinkets or something. And the reason they do that, it doesn't cost them very much money, but they do it because it works. People feel obligated, because of the power of reciprocity, to give back because they've gotten this thing. And to be honest, I fell for it for years, and I finally started learning about this, and I stopped doing it. So I think people are more onto them now, but in our everyday dealings with people, we do feel an obligation to, if they hold the door open for me, I'll hold the door open for them the next time. If your friend buys lunch, you'll buy lunch the next time. Things of that sort. even if it's just returning with a thank you note. That's a type of reciprocity, and that's a good thing. That's what makes society work. So these things, those are some of the examples. And one area I want to, you know, encourage is that of networking. We may have addressed this a little bit in the unit on job search, but networking is really important for where you are now and where you will be in your career. And you can be somewhat mercenary about it and be sort of like, well, I'm just doing this because they're going to do something for me. And if that's your attitude, then you don't need to be doing it. But networking is something that if somebody, you know, helps you out, you either pass it on or you help them out. And, you know, if you get a recommendation from somebody, some knowledge about a job that came open, sort of a push, you help them back, or you help someone they know back. So that's the power of reciprocity. And there's a lot of research behind this, but as far as how it relates to this particular lecture, you're in public speaking, you're not just talking at people. You're trying to help them understand. Understanding is the most basic goal of public speaking, and that's why I don't really have you do a persuasive speech in this class. I'd like to, but I want you to focus on basic communication, informative speaking, understanding in this presentation. And that requires you to have a reciprocal idea that you're helping the other person, you're giving them information, they're listening to you, and the emphasis is on understanding. And that's the bottom line of the power of reciprocity, not just some sort of, I get something out of it, but it is what holds society together. So when it comes to presentation structure, you are trying to help the audience listen. It's not just about being organized. It's about trying to help them listen. Public speaking is only partially about delivery. And a lot of times people just think public speaking is about delivery. And it's really only partially. That's kind of the frosting on the cake in some respects. You can have a good speech that's not well delivered, and you can have a really bad speech that is well delivered, and one's not particularly better than the other one. We have with public speaking the foundation of ideas or invention, organization, and word choices, and then the delivery is the last one. And the analogy I like to use for public speaking is blueprint. Your outline is a blueprint. It is not your speech. Your speech is what comes out of your mouth when you stand in front of an audience. That is your speech. It's a speech. Your outline is the guide for your speech. It is a blueprint. None of you live in a blueprint, but you live in a house that was designed and built based on blueprint. So keep in mind that your outline is not your speech. It is the guide of probably about 50% of the words, your guide for giving the speech. And that's why you need to have a good, solid, thick outline as per the examples that I have posted up in the class in this module. But at the same time, your outline and your speech is always under revision. It's always tentative in a sense. Every time you practice it, it should be a little different, a little bit better. Trying new things, cutting, adding, rephrasing, etc., for various reasons. The most important one is to make sure it's in the right time limit, because we can't emphasize that enough. The second one is to make sure that it helps the audience. The third is that you become more comfortable with it. And sometimes the sentences you might put in your outline don't sound good when you say them out loud. So you need to adapt for that. And that's why the practice and why the recording is so very important. And I cannot emphasize that enough. It's funny because in the fall when I taught this course, they give the speeches in groups, and after one group they said, "This really pushed me to practice." I was sort of surprised that that was a big revelation for them. But they learned so much from the practice. And as you become a more uh, accomplished speaker, you don't have to practice quite as much, but you still have to practice. No, you should never get up and give a presentation that you haven't practiced. I would say 3 or 4 or more times to make sure it's in time and it's the technology works and everything else. So you can the practice, I cannot emphasize it enough. And that's where the revision and adaptability comes in. And the last thing about public speaking is that, the audience is sovereign. And that, I used to use that word and people didn't know what it meant. It means the audience is king. It is all about the audience. If you are not connecting with the audience, there is no reason for you to be there. And how do you connect with an audience? Well, the first way you do it is by looking at them. And that's the easy way, and having good gestures and the delivery stuff. But it doesn't start there. It has to start at the very beginning with whatever it is your specific purpose statement is. What am I really trying to do here? And your assignment is to give and prepare a presentation for a real group of people, for a real imagined audience. So it's kind of ironic, but to think of a real group of people, whether it's your coworkers or it's a nonprofit or it's some clients you would want to engage, but to think of real people in a real setting, in a real job, etc. So the audience is sovereign. That you cannot emphasize it enough. And I would actually, again, refer you to the COM 1110 textbook, because our section on audience analysis is very good, and it's much better than you're going to get in most books. And I'm just saying that. Just saying. So why is structure so important? I really, really emphasize structure, and anybody who's had me for public speaking, basic speech, knows that I just pound this into the floor. It's because we do not have good listening skills. Let's face it, we just don't. And we need all the help we can get to listen. We have lost our ability to listen because we've become a more visual and print-oriented culture. 1,000 years ago, everybody had great listening skills because that's all they had. They didn't have print. They didn't have images. They just had to listen. But nowadays, we're just not good listeners. Another reason is that the audience probably cannot structure the information for themselves. Now, if they were reading it, they might be able to do that, but they're listening, and that's compounds the problem. So you have got to structure it for them. And they have to be helped to retain the information. So structure and the various elements of structure help them understand the material, help them structure, understand the logic, and help them remember it. So let's get down to the how. The first how. You should never, ever, ever have more than 5 main sections, points, Roman numerals, whatever you want to call it in your speech. And I'm going to call this the KISS principle. It's not keep it simple, stupid, but it's keep it simple, speaker or student. Now 5 is really too many. I would not recommend 5. I would say that 4 is good, depending on what you're trying to do. 3 is good. You might have 5 on a longer speech, but it's pushing it. So, 3 doesn't work for everything. Sometimes you need 4 major sections to your speech, but definitely no more than 5. And this gets all into the memory and short-term memory and all these kinds of things, what people can remember. When you have more than 5, your brain just can't really function on that, and you just don't want to do it. And of course, as you should have learned in COM 1110, you can play off the patterns. There's the chronological pattern of time, which is basically 2 types. There's historical time and process time. Historical being months, years, something along. Process time being relatively short. It could be as short as how long it takes to change oil in a car, that kind of thing, or bake some cookies. So the process time and historical time. There's also, when you're trying to show people how to do something, you're either showing them so they understand it or so that they can do it. And those are kind of 2 different things as well. Another pattern is spatial. So that if I were going to talk about the Eiffel Tower, I might start with the bottom, then go to the middle, then the top, That's pretty typical. Cause-effect patterns, and in most speeches, you either need to do just causes and effects, or just causes or just effects. Problem solution, which is for persuasive speeches normally, and then topical or parts of the whole, which is probably the one most of you will use for this presentation, but maybe not. Maybe you'll use one of the others. The word I want you to remember, and it will appear on the final exam, is the term planned redundancy. Planned redundancy is the idea that you have an introduction that previews the main points, just like I did with this PowerPoint. You notice I had a preview slide. Your PowerPoint should have the same thing. That you have transitions that are very clear, almost clunky, to let people know what they're what's coming next, where you've been, what's the logic, why are we connected here. And then you have the summary in the end. And there are ways to do that artfully and seamlessly, and there are ways to do it kind of, again, clunky, but you as you develop, you get to do better. And once you're a more experienced public speaker, you can kind of do the transition on the fly, but I don't recommend that now. It's very hard to ad-lib transitions unless you are very used to it. Another thing you might want to think about in your presentation is, after you give the researched information, is to have what's called the takeaway points as your last points. You could have maybe 3 main sections of information and then have a 4th point that is the application, the practical, what do you do, next steps, takeaways, things like that. This is something people have come to expect. I think it's a good thing, where you're not just saying all the stuff I've already said is not important, this is just the important stuff. That's not the point. You're saying, based on what I've said, based on this theory, based on this research, based on this knowledge, what are we taking away from this? How does this affect our lives? What can we do with this? And this gets into the WIIFM paradigm, which means what's in it for me. And for the audience to be sovereign, you have to constantly be aware that what's in it for me. They're asking that question. And this is where, along with the introduction, this is where you give them here's what's in it for you. This is what you can do with this information. And I think that's a practical way to sort of have a last point before your actual conclusion. It shouldn't be in your conclusion. Your conclusion should be for summary and just sort of the final oomph. But as a last point, it's good. So, as far as introductions, if you give me an introduction on your video that you submit for this class that says, "Hi, my name is Mary and my speech is about social media," I will immediately give you a 0 on your introduction. So, and I'm telling you, don't do that. This is not an AA meeting. And it's, and I'm not trying to be flip there. Really, I've had classes where everybody would do that, and it was almost like, are you kidding me? Mr. Dry, whom some of you know, he calls it, "Hi, my name is Bob and my speech is about cheese." Don't do that. You know that you need to have a grabber, an attention getter, that the first words out of your mouth should not be some blah blah about my name is and I'm going to talk about, etc., etc. You need to get our attention. Think about commercials. They don't come on in the commercial and say, "Hello, this is Sonic and our commercial, and we're going to try to sell you a burger." No, they don't do that. They do something funny. They have music. They have dancing girls. Whatever they do, they grab you at the beginning because they've got 15 seconds to sell their burgers or their whatever it is they sell at Sonic. So you've got to start. The first thing out of your mouth has to be your grabber. And you again go back to the COM 1110 book. A lot of ways to do this. The best is a story. You can use an apt quotation. Be sure to give the source. You can use startling statistic or fact. Rhetorical question, although that's overused, but you can do that. But don't start with "Hello, my name is Mary and my speech is about whatever," okay? Because I literally will give you a 0 on your introduction if you start like that. You know better. And what happens is you get up in front of an audience and your mind goes blank, and so that's what you do. And that's why you have to practice your introduction so much. Also, after your grabber, and you do other things in the introduction, but make sure that you bridge things, that you don't just give your grabber, your attention getter, and then go right into your topic. You have to have some seamlessness to it, some transitional. You should have a thesis and, of course, and a preview of your main points. These are things you should know. A thesis or central idea in a speech is a little more personal. It can be a little more direct in a speech. It doesn't have to be like you did in English comp class. You can say you can say in this speech I'm going to, etc., etc. You can do that kind of thing. And give the main points that you'll cover. And you don't want to spend more than 10 to 15% of the time on the introduction. So if this is a 10-minute speech, and it can go up to 14 minutes before I start taking points off, but it's really supposed to be 10 to 12. If it's less than 10, your grade will be affected severely. But let's say it's 10 minutes. That would mean that a minute and 30 of it you should be in the body of your speech by then. You shouldn't have an introduction that's going on 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And this happens sometimes. Now, in this speech, the only exception to this is sometimes people put their interactive exercise in their introduction. That's okay, because that's not part of your introduction. But even still, you don't want that to go on for 5 minutes. So, so make sure that you're in control of the time. It's very important in your introduction that you have eye contact, energy, and passion. You also need to speak clearly and emphatically, and not slowly necessarily, but clearly, because we're trying to listen to your voice. We're trying to get used to your voice. And if you just get up there and blah, 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 and start mumbling and start going 90 miles an hour, we can't focus on your voice, and we're not clear what you're saying. So really practice the introduction. It makes or breaks you. As far as conclusion, always, always, always summarize. There's no reason not to summarize in a conclusion. Make us remember it, the main ideas and the takeaways. Okay, like I said, if you're going to have the main emphasis or the takeaways or the practical steps, that should be the last point of your speech. But you can reiterate this, end with a quotation, end with a good story. The best type of conclusion is where you refer back to whatever was in the introduction. So if you give a startling fact that's sort of scary in the introduction, you can sort of refer to that again. Let's say you say something, you find some research that shows that so many people lost their jobs last year for bad use of social media in the workplace. And so you can refer back to that and sort of say, it's, as communication students, it's important for us to spread the word so that more people don't get in trouble in the workplace for their use of social media. And you can have an emotional appeal. That's probably not as important for this kind of speech, but sometimes it fits. And as I said, the best method is to refer to the introduction. And you can tell my phone has decided to go off. And I'm turning it off. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is connectives. These are transitions, okay? These are crucial to the audience understanding and retention. What do? They can remind the audience of central focus, what has come before, and what's going to come up. They can give a sense of context in your thought processes. They can explain the logical connections of your ideas. And they can keep the audience's attention through repetition and a sense of movement. It's sort of the idea of signposting. They can, we are moving. We're going somewhere. Okay, this is the next. And I cannot emphasize transitions enough. I really can't. And that is why on the thick outline that you turn into me, you have to put the transitions on it, because you need to plan your transitions. Again, when you're an experienced speaker, you can think of them on the fly, but you're not there yet. So think of how you're going to connect point one to what comes next, point two to what comes next. You at least need transitions between your major points, your major Roman numerals, if you want to call it that. I think personally you should have transitions between your subpoints too, but that's sometimes a little more difficult to pull off. So, and the thing about transitions is you can prepare one, and then maybe when you're practicing the speech, you listen to it, you say, oh, that one doesn't work. And so you change it, and that's fine. That's why we practice. It's an oral mode of communication, and that requires practice and change and adaptability. So it's okay to do that. Don't feel like once you give me the outline, you have to follow it to the letter. I expect there to be some changes. The outline, though, tells me that you've done due diligence in getting the preparation done. So